Hey everybody, happy Thursday. It is the 28th of April. This is MedusaWasFramed and my name is Joyce. And today I'm going to talk about Rolle, which was a failed attempt to build a white indentured servant utopian colony in northern Florida. Yes, I said that right. This is an interesting road we're going down here. I learned about this when I was doing a little bit of research for my last two videos, which were about the city of an area around the city of Crescent City, where I spent last weekend visiting a friend, where there were fantastic Moorish churches with entirely suspicious histories and absolutely magnificent abandoned cemeteries. So those last two cemetery videos and the research involved in them brought me to discover this place. So we have a whole video just about it. So we end up moving out of Florida for this one, but I'm just going to start the slideshow and, as usual, start yapping and you guys can follow along. So in 1961, the Florida Board of Parks and Historical Memorials erected a marker in East Palatka, the Rollestown historical marker in Wayside Park. And that is all that remains of the over 78,000 acres of Utopian colony taking Rolle's name. It stood from 1767 to 1783 as a continued abject failure. I shouldn't laugh. This was during the British occupation of Florida. And it is now what is considered Putnam County. And where it stood is now the cities of Hastings, Spuds, San Mateo, East and West Palatka. So here we go. So Lord, God, we're already starting in bad condition. Lord Dennis, spelled D-E-N-Y-S, I'll have you know. Dennis Rolle was born in 1925 and he passed away in 1797. He was born with an absolute silver spoon in his mouth in Hudscott, Devon. He was elected an independent member of Parliament for Barnstaple, Devon, serving between 1761 and 1774. He was a legacy to Parliament in his region. His father and grandfather also served. He inherited large amounts of estates, and by the time of his death in 1797, he was the largest landowner in all of Devon. It shouldn't surprise you then that his utopian attempt was a whopping 78,000 acres. Wikipedia calls him a philanthropic and generous benefactor to religious society, a modest man, considered eccentric, loved farm labor and wildlife. He was puritanical and prohibitionistic, stubborn, high-handed, megalomaniacal, and completely lacking in diplomatic skills. And that's him right there. In May 1764, he scored a grant from the British Crown for 20,000 acres in an area called St. Mark's, which is near Tallahassee, near the very top and center of Florida. That's our capital. Florida went from Spain to England to Spain to America. This was in that time when, after the 7 Years' War, Florida was British. So part of the conditions of him being awarded this grant is he had to populate it with Protestants. I'm laughing because he populated it with the worst of the worst street people that he found. He was determined to make it a colony of white indentured, and kind of started this shyster campaign to impress people. Oh yeah, I'm going to bring white people over. We can rehabilitate white people with good hard work. Does that remind you of anything you've heard before? Work will set you free. Anyway, I digress. On June 10th of 1764, he set sail for Florida with 24 settlers. Settlers. Street people from London. He arrived in Charleston on August 12th, 1764, and then in St. Augustine, September of 1764. St. Augustine at the time was the capital of East Florida and the mysteriously morbid city I now call home. So upon inspecting his land up in St. Mark's near Tallahassee, he found that it was completely unacceptable for a colony. Too much work had to be done, basically, to make it workable. So he requested from the East Florida Governor James Grant, Florida was then divided into East and West properties, for land on the east bank of the St. Johns River in what is now East Palatka. He named this colony, his 20,000 acres, Charlotta, after Queen Charlotte, wife of George III. The name broke down over time. It was turned into Charlottia, which sounds like just people saying it wrong. And then it became known as Rollestown, and it's still referred to now as Rollestown. And the center of that beginning of the land expansion is now today's San Mateo, Florida. So, being the megalomaniac that he was always interested in enlarging his settlement. But also, as he was noted, as he had no diplomacy skills and was kind of a whiner. He didn't get off very well with Florida Governor Grant. Being puritanical and prohibitionistic, he thought that St. Augustine was completely debauched, completely corrupted, and that the governor was corrupted. So he had no patience for him, no respect for him, looked at him as someone who should be serving him in every way, since he was there trying to civilize the land, and you know how that goes. Governor Grant had invited Denny Rolle and his wife and some other prominent landowners and such to his home for dinner. But apparently all Rolle did was bitch and moan and whine and complain and tell him what more he needed and how things were not going the way he wanted and blah, 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 and you should clean up the city and do more. Anyway, that didn't work out very well for Rolle because Grant just didn't give him any more land. He didn't approve any more land grants. So pissed off with this, Rolle returned to England in October of 1765 to address the Board of Trade and complain. Oh, they're not treating me right. They're not giving me what I need. He penned a formal petition to the British Board of Trade, and I'm going to read the title of this. This is all the title, all these words. A humble petition of Dennis Rolle, Esquire, setting forth the hardship, inconvenience, and grievances which have attended him in his attempts to make a settlement in East Florida, humbly praying such relief as in their vision shall seem met. Yeah, how humble does that sound? He returned to Florida in 1766 with 50 more of his Utopian colonizers, pickpockets, grafters, streetwalkers, debtors, beggars, shoe shiners, women known as bunters, who I had to look that up, but apparently those are the women, the rag women, the women who collect rags and things around town. And brought them back, tried to put them to work. But so these were people who were not successful at home when they were free. So why would you think that taking people who, I mean, say what you want about homeless people and street people, they're living the life they want. I mean, at the end of the day, they are living in their concept of liberty, right? So why would you think that bringing people who were living in their own liberty would want to labor? And there's a big difference between the streets of London and Florida. It's really hot here. And if you're inland in Florida, working land, it's unbelievable. There's gators, there's bugs, there's snakes. It's pretty brutal. Anyway, so he went back to England in January of 1678 to get more people and to complain again to the Board of Trade that this Florida governor was just not doing his job and not supporting him. He returned with close to 100 more street people that he had contracted with for indenture. This boat landed in Charleston before they went on to St. Augustine. But a lot of these people apparently escaped as soon as they landed in Charleston. And then some more escaped when they landed in St. Augustine. So more than half of them were gone. He went one more time to complain and find more street people. In total, he ended up bringing over 200 people, but so many had escaped at landing, or even during indenture, they would just up and leave. They were considered lazy and useless by Rolle, by his overseers, and by neighboring landowners. So yes, so both Governor Grant and other landowners and such powerful people in St. Augustine got really tired of hearing him whine and complain, but were also concerned that he had all this acreage, prime acreage along the St. Johns River, massive river, and that it wasn't being used properly. He couldn't keep people. The people that he had weren't trained. He was running back to England on a regular basis. He wasn't around. His managers, overseers, whatever you want to call them, were not well trained, and the reputation was that they were very cruel and unreasonable. So yeah, he was not a good neighbor. Governor didn't like him. And I just find it kind of funny that apparently he's made out to be this Puritan and a loyalist and so prohibitionistic, right? And yet, who were the people that he brought here? He didn't bring people like that here. he brought people here. He invested in people to bring them here to do all this hard labor. I just think it's funny. I guess it kind of is part of the megalomania, right? Like, oh, you think you can fix them? You think you can save them? They're listed as being criminals, barmaids, prostitutes, as I said, swindlers. Well, there's nothing wrong with being a shoe shiner. Pickpockets, grafters, debtors. Not a good team to build clearing land and raising crops with. I mean, yeah. Anyway, he was such a whiny nag that apparently Governor Grant had to issue him a formal letter saying, you know what? I'm tired of your bitching, dude. I'm tired of your complaining. You're not welcome in my house anymore. I'm not going to see you if you come into town. I'm not going to see you if you come to governor's house. I'm not going to see you in my office. If you got something to say or something to complain about, write a letter. He was just sick and tired of them. Rolle, of course, was complaining that he couldn't keep workers and that he, no matter what he did, he couldn't keep workers. And he deserved more land to bring more people onto, but he couldn't even develop the land that he had. Just sounds like a really bad thing. And I guess the other landowners in the area who agreed that this guy was trouble were starting to form an alliance of people who were really trying to do something to get him out of there. And at one point, Governor Grant started asking the wealthy to buy land around him, around Rolle's property, so he couldn't buy any more, as well as to not sell land to him if they had land near him. So in 1769, Rolle again returned to England to try one last time to bring white indentures. So his vessel arrived, and this one arrived in Savannah with 80 purchased colonists, as we'll call them, but he wasn't there. He wasn't on the boat because he'd been such a whiny twit to the captain that the captain wouldn't let him on the boat. So he brought his 80 colonists, but he wouldn't let Rolle on the boat. So Rolle had to come over on his own. Well, duh. What happened when the boat landed in Savannah? All those people left. Oh my God. So Rolle comes back on a ship separately. And apparently before he had left on this last trip for England, he had purchased 1,000 cattle from Georgia. And when he left, they were doing well. But he was so back and forth, Florida, England, Florida, England. And, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and he wasn't used to managing people, and he wasn't used to real life issues. So he didn't really understand the cost. He was a guy from Parliament. He didn't know anything about owning a plantation or owning a farm or managing hardworking people. And he was always fighting with his overseer, a man named William Collins. Collins is telling him, dude, you need to pay for these things. You've purchased them on credit. They're coming to me because I'm the one always here, and they want their money. And they're creating problems, and they're not going to give us any more of this or that until you pay. So I'm going to have a drink of water here real quick. So the last time when Rolle was in Britain, some of the debtors really came hard after Overseer Collins. And so you couldn't exactly pick up a phone and call people then. And this had been going on for some time. So what the guy did, what the overseer did, is he gathered up all the cattle, all the crops from that season, and sold them so that he could pay off the debt. So what happened? Well, so Rolle comes back from England. The 80 indentured servants he had just purchased ran off. His cows were gone, and there was no crop to sell from the last season. And of course, he had a fit. How dare you? So this turned into another complaint to Governor Grant about his lazy workers and his dishonest management that apparently went unanswered. Like, I roll. So then, since he didn't have his 80 British workers, he went ahead and he bought some slaves, some African slaves. And he needed his cattle back. So he purchased the same amount, another purchase of 1,000 head of cattle. But unfortunately, the people that he had left working there, and apparently when he was gone, whenever he would go and leave the country, he would lose more of his indentured servants that had been working there. So anyway, needless to say, it was never a well-disciplined, strong force. And most of the animals, though they arrived at Roll Town, ended up being killed by poachers or stolen by rustlers. So that just didn't work out very well. In 1780, he went ahead and purchased the slaves from a plantation that was selling. It was the Jericho plantation in the town of Calfort, which is now known as Jacksonville. Calford because Jacksonville is founded at the narrowest point of the St. Johns River. It was the cow ford where you would cross the cows across the water because it was the narrowest and the shallowest. So Rollstown at this point was 23 miles long along the east bank of the St. Johns River. Their primary production, though not only production, was rice, corn, and pine, or turpentine and lumber, for the British Navy. So he was fed up with Governor Grant by this point, and he had wanted to buy land, and Grant was doing all that he could do to keep him from expanding or buying any more land. As discussed before, the governor and other landowners were dissatisfied with the fact that so little of the land he had was developed, and yet he kept wanting more and more. So anyway, he managed to buy 20,000 acres from a William Elliott, 20,000 more acres from a John Greyhurst, 10,000 acres from a William Penrith, 5,000 acres from James Cusack, and 1,500 acres from John Gray on the west side of the St. Johns River. All the other stuff and all his property so far was on the east side. So now he had land in what is now considered Palatka or West Palatka. Nobody calls it West Palatka, they just call it Palatka. So he purchased a total of 200 slaves when he purchased this additional 9,000 acres. Yet only about 600 acres of what he had was developed. Now, at around this time, the naturalists William and John Bartram were traveling through the South, which turned into a book and the establishment of the Bartram Trail, which is the course of where they went. So the Bartrams passed by, and inspected Rollestown. And besides the beauty of the land, also noticed how undeveloped it was for as many people as were there, but also the harsh way that the indentured and slaves were treated, and the inefficiency of the whole thing, and the ineptitude of Dennis Rolle himself. And that went into their notes and their publications, and it went in a special report to Governor Grant. Oops. Now, Rolle would have kept buying and kept buying and kept buying, but Britain returned Florida to Spain through the Treaty of Versailles in 1783. Oops, that ended all of that. Oh, so that created a lot of problems for some, and it created happiness for others, as I've talked about in other videos. There were a lot of people that were happy that it was returned to Spain. But anyway, people had to up and leave. Things were just not going to work right. This was a political deal that he had. He had a land deed from Britain, and Britain no longer had rights to the land. So unless he was going to belly up all the money to buy all that land outright, he just had to bail. So of course, being the big whiner that he is, he put together this claim to the governor of East Florida, Governor Grant, and you can read it. I mean, it's pages and pages and pages. But you know, he lists orange grove and cornlands and cattle, hogs, sheep, indigo farm, pine for tar and lumber and turpentine, rice fields, cornfield, rye, and all of those crops, and all of the building. Just whiny wine. Yeah, he didn't get much. And in 1784, he was part of the general exodus from British Florida. Also, there were a lot of slaves that managed to scoot away at this time when everything was in turmoil. He complained to British Parliament, hey, you know, you need me to pay for all this. Florida's not going to pay me back for all this stuff, so you need to pay me back. Wine. Well, Britain said, no, we're not going to pay you, but we'll give you a place to move. And what he offered them was the island of Exuma in the Bahamas. So that he was given the whole island, 2,000 acres. He took 400 slaves, his son, who became his heir, John Rolle, and what stock and equipment he could to Exuma. Denny Rolle died January 25th, 1797, back home by that time in Devon, of a heart attack while taking a long walk in his beloved nature. He was 72. His son, John Rolle, assumed primary role as Exuma, boss man, and Rolletown was settled. Though John, his son, also never set foot there. He stayed in England, served in the Parliament like his father did and grandfather did before, and managed to do it via overseers. Now in the Bahamas, slaves were declared free on the 1st of August in 1838. Yay! And as happened here in the United States as well, many of those newly freed people adopted the Rolle name. So the newly liberated were given the opportunity to take over Rolletown Plantation in Exuma, and they ran it communally. There were different plots, and they ran it all as a big commune. And this was honored by the government there at the time, governor being in Nassau, even though apparently there was no formal document It was just honored. And today there are still 5 Lord John Rolle commonage estates on Exuma, including Rolle Town, the city of Rolle Town. These have passed down through descendants of the slaves that were freed and cannot be sold. And apparently that, again, is being honored. So noted Rolles of Bahamian descent are the actress Esther Rolle from Pompano Beach, Florida, Myron Rolle, who was a football player and Rhodes Scholar, and Magnum Rolle, who played in the NBA out of Freeport, Bahamas. 2016 was also named John Rolle, and he is the man, interestingly enough, who designed their digital currency, which is called sand dollars. 60% of the residents of Exuma to this day have the Rolle last name. Wow, right? So a little bit more about the stuff that happened in the Bahamas. Now, again, I didn't know about this either. This was all learned. This was all learned in a very quick period of time. So in slave rebellion history and in Bahamian history, there is a very famous individual that goes by the name of Pompey. And the incident was known as the Pompey Slave Rebellion. So Pompey was a slave of the Rolle Plantation. I do not believe, no, I guess he was brought over. I'm not sure if he was brought over from Florida or if he was Bahamian. I didn't get that far in the research, but he was an African slave who worked for the Rolle Plantation. And he was always a leader against slavery. So in 1829, when he was, in 1829, anti-slavery, prohibitionistic stuff was really starting to grow in the Bahamas, apparently. There was a lot of it growing. And in 1830, when Pompey was 32 years old, he led a group of 77 men to run away from Rollestown with the plan to steal a boat and make their way over to Nassau to petition to the governor, who at the time was very sensitive to the slave situation. The Rolles were expanding their empire, and they wanted to move a large group of their slaves to another island called Cat Island, where they were expanding their empire. And these guys didn't want to go. And Pompey really stood up for that. So the escapees were able to hide in the bush for weeks. And then they managed to sneak a boat and they set out for Nassau to petition Governor Carmichael Smith to help them. They shouldn't have to be up and moved. If they wanted to stay, they should stay. They may be slaves, but they had dignity and they shouldn't be forced to move. Well, they got caught, unfortunately. But they weren't handled badly by the Nassau government, it sounds like. They were simply returned to Exuma and to Rollestown. When they got there, the slaves that were still there saw them as heroes, of course. And so it turned into a big strike and everyone refused to work. So they had to call in the military because none of the slaves would work. And what ended up happening is that Pompey was given 39 lashes. So now I read different stories about that. Some say that Pompey chose to take all the punishment to not burden anyone else with it, right? And some stories say that the army decided that they were going to make an example out of him and give him the 39. But whichever way it went, the story goes the same, that he got 39 lashes. You make your own decision. Now, this uprising was seen as a first real victory for Bahamian slaves, showing that slaves were not just property like livestock or furniture that could be sold and moved. And then in 1838, Bahamas freed their slaves. So cool. Took 8 years, but it happened nonetheless. There's a statue of Pompeii that you've seen slide by, and it sits in front of some of the ruins from the Rollestown plantation on a hill said to be where the slaves would have set off in the stolen boat for Nassau. And there is a Pompeii museum that's in the old Vendue house, which was built sometime before 1769. It was originally called Bourse and Vendue, I probably said that wrong, which is French for stock and sell. So essentially it was the slave market for African and Creole slaves that was closed in 1880. In 1992, it became a national museum, national landmark. There is the statue of Pompeii right there, and that shirt that he had on his knee, they do a race now called the Race for Pompeii. So cool. Oh, and I lost my place. Okay. So a little bit about the Bartram Trail. So John and William Bartram, as I said, were naturalists that traveled in the South from 1773 to 1777 through North and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. And this resulted in a book. And there is something called the Bartram Trail, which I believe runs through all of that land. It certainly runs through Florida. We have schools named Bartram School and all that stuff. They have a marker in the riverfront portion of the town of Palatka. It's part of the Bartram Trail. They also discovered what they named Mount Royal in 1765, which was an Indian burial mound of the indigenous at the time, who the Spanish managed to eliminate from the earth, the Timucua. That was the language they spoke, they called Timucua. They called themselves, as I understand it, Tocobongo, but they became referred to as the Timucuan. That was the name of their language. Anyway, archaeological evidence has shown there being stuff back to 1500 AD there in that region. And that actually is not in Palatka. It's in the town that I was in last weekend, in Crescent City, on the outskirts of Crescent City, the town where I got all the beautiful Tartarian churches and the beautiful abandoned cemeteries. It's in Crescent City. Still the region, same county, but not part of Rolle Town. Anyway, part of the Bartram Trail. Okay, so what I want to do now is tell you a little bit about the cities that have sprung up on what once was Rolle Town. They're all along State Road 207. If you've seen the video that I did of stopping along the highway and walking through an abandoned cemetery that is overgrown by the woods, that's Hastings, and that's State Road 207. So anyway, Hastings, Spuds, San Mateo, and Palatka are the cities that are now where Rollestown once stood. So we're going to start with Hastings. Thomas Horace Hastings was a cousin of Henry Flagler. Henry Flagler the Shill Henry Flagler, who is attributed with building the Florida Railroad, no, he didn't build it. He found it and he made some changes to it, but he didn't build it. He didn't build anything. He found everything. But anyway, he had Standard Oil money. So he had lots of money and lots of connections. And he had 2 big hotels, eventually 3 big hotels in St. Augustine. That's Hastings right there. That's Thomas Horace Hastings, who was Flagler's cousin. Together they established Prairie Garden Plantation, 1,569 acres, in what is now Hastings. Hastings is 18 miles west of St. Augustine, to grow the winter vegetables for Henry Flagler's 3 hotels in St. Augustine, and perhaps eventually to serve more of his hotels, because as he made changes in the extant railroad, he developed hotels along his railroad. But anyway, we're just talking about the St. Augustine stuff now. Now, the rail ran through the area there, but it didn't have a stop at Hastings. And there's a rumor that both Hastings and Flagler paid off some teenage hooligans to move the sign that was in another town nearby to the railroad track along at Hastings and put Hastings' name on it. Who knows? But I like that story. So there was a stop right there by his plantation. In 1909, the city was chartered. And Irish potatoes were big money at the time. Hastings became Florida's potato capital. There's still a sign in Hastings, what little there is of Hastings, that calls it Florida's potato capital. And in 1917, the price of potatoes soared. So the locals had extra money to buy things, cars, jewelry, all that stuff. So the town really grew, business expanded, and then Dixie Highway was extended so that St. Augustine people could visit in the 1920s, come down to Hastings and visit. That's a picture of what's left of Hastings. Hastings became, and now is, the packing and shipping center for 3 counties, Flagler, Putnam, and St. Johns County. It really grew in the early 1900s. And several farming companies joined together to form the Hastings Potato Growers Association in 1927. So there's Hastings himself. That's some of Main Street, downtown Hastings. You can see, look at that church. Look at that beautiful Tartarian church. Yeah, it's got mud flood windows. That actually is, we stop that right there. That actually is still a very productive farm. In fact, if you saw the video that I made of pulling off the road and walking around an abandoned cemetery, the forest has overgrown. It's right next to this farm, ranch. And it's kind of a known thing because it's got that cow up on top. So, you know, if it's like a point of reference, like, is it north or south of the cow? Also, apparently there used to be Bull's Hit potato chips in Florida that were very, very popular. I don't know, it was before my time, but anyway, this is still a main producer of potatoes, cauliflower, onions, and cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, corn, and hay. Yeah, when they were making Bull's chips, they would sell 5,200 bags a year. And that's more of that Hastings. Look at that, look at that. And that's Hastings too, what's left of it. So let me just stop here. So this is the Florida Potatoes Growers Association. Look at that building. Yeah, they just built that in 1927. Yeah, sure they did. Hastings, the potato capital of Florida. This is an old photo of potato crops. This is a map letting you see what's going on. This is the whole state of Florida. This is Putnam County now, and then this is a close-up of Putnam County. So this is St. Johns River. And Palatka, San Mateo, East Palatka. So it was up actually off the map where everything started. Spuds, Hastings, San Mateo. So it was all along here that Rosetown was. I'm going to stop there for a second. Oh no, wait. I'm going to let that go. That's when I talk about Palatka. That's an old building in Hastings. Beautiful. Hastings, Florida. Okay, so now we're going to talk about spuds. So spuds, what do you think they do in spuds? Do you think they grow potatoes in spuds? It's an unincorporated part of Putnam County, known for the sales of potatoes and gladiola. But in World War II, it had a German World War II POW base, and that's what you see right there. There you see a prisoner of war doing mechanical work. So in 1942, Britain was running out of places to send their prisoners, so camps in America started to open. And the camp at Spuds, there's nothing left of it now, but it stood between State Road, the intersection of State Road 206 and 207. And the Florida East Coast Railroad, which Flagler bought, formerly ran through Spuds to St. Augustine and then to Palatka, and it had a stop called Spuds. That line doesn't run anymore, but it has become part of the Palatka-St. Augustine State Trail, which was a really nice bike trail that runs all this way. Really, really nice bike trail. So in May of 1943, German and Italian POWs started arriving in the US and Florida. 425,000 POWs were housed in the US in 175 branch camps and 511 area camps. 10,000 of those came to Florida, and Camp Blanding, which is about an hour from here, was the largest of all of those. It sits in Clay County, north central Florida, and Stark is the closest city to Camp Blanding. It's 36 miles southwest of Jacksonville. It's training for Florida's National Guard and Florida Army National Guard lands, where they do maneuvers that don't require flying. Originally, it was built as a naval station in the late 30s, named after Lieutenant General Albert H. Blanding, who was a Floral native and commanding the 2nd Florida Brigade during the Mexican Border War of 1916 to 1917. In 1940, the Army leased it for training. It held 2,000 German POWs at its height. During World War II, the camp grew to equal the size of the 4th largest city in Florida at the time, and was one of the largest training centers, accommodating 3,000 military at one time. That's some German POWs harvesting potatoes. So 500 POW camps in the US in 45 states. There were 2 major camps in Florida, Stark, the one I spoke about, and in the Panhandle. And then there were 27 smaller branch camps. Florida got the German POWs who worked on U-boats and in the Africa Corps. The Museum of Florida History in Tallahassee has several POW exhibits, a POW shirt, lighters, Bibles, personal effects, and a reconstruction of a camp landing model. So the Geneva Convention in 1939 prohibited the use of forced labor and starvation. So the prisoners had to be fed the same food that all the military and workers did, but also have access to the same amenities and sanitation. So these German POWs worked picking citrus, cut sugar cane, shot pine for firewood, and tap for turpentine and pitch, which was very popular at the time, and potatoes. They couldn't force labor, but if the POW wanted to work, he could. And there's a book all about this that was written by Robert Billinger in 200 called Hitler's Soldiers in the Sunshine State, if you're interested in reading more. Florida's POWs worked from 8 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the military charged the farmers the going rate for labor, paying prisoners 80 cents a day in coupons to trade at the canteen. The bunkers, and you saw the bunkers, will hold up to 6 men. They had mosquito netting, but no air conditioning. The prisoners at Camp Blanding were allowed to fish in the canals that were on base. They watched films if they wanted to with the rest of the military twice a week, and assembled a concert band with instruments they purchased with saving their canteen money, and were allowed to take classes in bookkeeping, English, geometry, chemistry, and held access to American magazines and newspapers. They also were allowed to buy cigarettes in the canteen, and this created a problem because when distributors found out that their products were being shared with these filthy Germans, they stopped sending the cigarettes or cut down what they sent. And at Camp Belgrade, which is near the current day Palm Beach, the POWs had a strike and refused to work for 2 days. So that really didn't go over very well. The public was not very happy to hear about these coddled prisoners of war. Prisoners who died in captivity were buried in the cemeteries at the camps that had cemeteries on property. Camp Blanding is one of them. Anyone that would have died at the one in Hastings obviously would have been taken to Camp Blanding. Okay, so now we're going to talk about East Palatka. So that's known as the Gem City of the St. John's. It was established in 1821. And its name comes from the Timucuan word for crossing, which, forgive me for not saying this right, Pilotkata. Now, the original settlement burned during the Second Seminole War of 1836. Most of Florida burned during the Second Seminole War of 1836. In 1838, the government established Fort Shannon there. And in 1842, a commander general by the name of William Worth was promoted to command Florida and Fort Shannon. It was a supply depot, a garrison hospital. It had 8 blockades, a hospital, officers' barracks, and stable for 400 horses. It was abandoned in 1842. And the Union troops occupied Palatka briefly, running gunboats along the river during the Civil War. It was abandoned in 1843. It was named after 1st Infantry 2nd Quartermaster Captain Samuel Shannon, who died in 1836 and is buried in St. Augustine's National Cemetery, which you might know I've done a couple videos about. It's where the Florida pyramids are. In 1880, the camp started being harvested for building materials, unfortunately, and all that remains is the officers' quarters, which is now the Putnam County History Museum. It became known as the Gem of St. John's during the boom days, and it had 6 world-class hotels, and some of those big snazzy hotels you see are from Palatka. Of course, they all burned like everything else. The late 1800s, Palatka was booming for timber. In 1884, a fire destroyed downtown and all of those hotels. In 1894, the Great Freeze killed the citrus business. Palatka is 60 miles south of Jacksonville and 29 miles southwest of St. Augustine. Okay, so what's up with the pigs? Well, so when the Spanish came back to Florida, all of the British land deed holders had to pay up and settle or split. So you'll remember Britain offered Dennis Rolle the opportunity to move to a new plantation, and they gave him Exuma. Well, if you've been to Exuma, which I haven't, but I know about this, one of the most famous things about Exuma is the wild hogs that wade out in the water, that will come and swim with you, that will come up to your boats. They're like squirrels. They're begging for food because people feed them. So I included these photos of the Exuma pigs because it's likely that the ancestors of these pigs were Dennis Rolle's pigs and hogs that he brought from Florida. That's a picture of, I'm on slideshow, so I can't blow this up, but that's an indication of where San Mateo is. So here's Palatka, this is all the St. John's River, and this is San Mateo. San Mateo is just farmland. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. It's right on the St. John's River. It's very tree-filled and lush, but it's a very undeveloped farmland area, but very beautiful, unincorporated area. And that's Henry Hastings. Unfortunately, that's what a lot of Main Street Hastings looks like now. Look at that church though. Look at that beautiful church. And you know, if you look up these churches online, there's like nothing about their history, but come on, that is so, and you can see I just snapped that from my car. Yeah. Yeah, arch with a keystone. And there are the coiled columns and the cymatic resonator. Yep, not a church. We already talked about Bull's Hit Ranch. I love that old truck. That's the side of that beautiful church. Can you see the... There's mud flood windows there. I don't know if you can tell. Yeah. More of Hastings, although that's an old photo, it still looks that way. And that's the Potato Growers Association, again, suspect. Hastings, potato capital of Florida. The cool photo of harvesting potatoes. I showed you that map. Okay, so now we're getting into those snazzy hotels that were in Palatka when tourism in Palatka was booming, because the timber trade coming out of Palatka was booming, thanks to Henry Flagler's improvements in the railroads that existed. But Yeah. Who thinks that was built as a hotel? What a shame it burned, right? Like everything else. Hastings now, sadly. The Irish Potato City. That's a Hotel James from Palatka. You know, it's stone. It could still be there. I don't know if it is or not. Certainly it's not a hotel anymore. That's the Putman House. That was one of the hotels in Palatka, one of the 5-star hotels in Palatka. They turned the collectors into flagpoles. And I don't know what they did with the bell towers, put windows in them, it looks like. But that burned down too. Of course it did. That's all that's left of Fort Shannon. And that's the 2-part. I couldn't find anywhere a date about when this was built, but of course that's the Pompey statues, his brave break. And I explained that there's a race now called Race for Pompeii, and that's one of the shirts from the race. Looks like he had something in his hand, doesn't it? I imagine, well, I don't know, but I wonder if what he had in his hand was like a, you know, they were rowing at night. So if it was a long pole or something like that. And this is a drawing of what Camp Blanding looked like. Lake McKinley, I think that's called. What Camp Blanding looked like when it was a prisoner of war camp. That's from the Florida Museum of History, and some German POWs inside their barracks. I don't know if that was Camp Blanding, another one, and that's somebody working on some machining. That's another plaque of Rolestown. So since we're back to the beginning, let's do this, because now from here I can make, so okay, we've seen that a million times. So this is a good bit of the area in question, not all of it, but a good bit of what made up Rolestown is in that shot. And that's the idiot right there. This is an illustration of how potatoes were carted to market, or in this case, if they came from the Hastings plantation, then they were carted to the train, and the train delivered them to downtown St. Augustine. The station was at, oh gosh, I can't think of the name of the street, but it's just a few blocks from the Flagler Hotel, where Henry Flagler's train station was. And this is a shot from Hastings when they opened a new street. Just kind of cool to look at all that detail. They were excited to have a new street, man. La-dee-da. La-dee-da. What's left of a building in downtown Hastings? Camp Landing. That's a huge place. Camp Landing is massive. I was going out to visit a friend considerably west of here, and I ended up going right past Camp Landing, and it's out in the middle of nowhere, as it would be, right? Army and Florida National Guard training facilities, and it's one of those places that just goes on and on and on and on. And, this was a shot in Hastings with some equipment, clearly after the POW days, and more of the piggies. That's what I've heard. They'll just come up on your boat and beg for attention and food. Anyway, I think that's where we started. Yep, I think that's where we started. So that's where we'll end. So thank you for hanging out with me this afternoon, talking about Rolle's Town. And you can't even call it a ghost town because there's nothing left but a sign. But anyway, fascinating the things you find when you go down a rabbit hole and you find all other kind of things. So I thank you for hanging out. Thank you for all my new subscribers. Yesterday I was on Andrew Zebrun III's channel. We just kind of did an impromptu yap, and I shared a few things about mysterious things that lay at the bottom of the ocean in various places that you can see on Google Earth, and speculation on some things that you no longer can see. Google Earth. Yeah, we found what appear to be some pyramids off the coast of New Hampshire. We found stuff in Lake Superior on the Michigan side, all kinds of interesting things. A stone circle. Anyway, yeah, so if you're interested, go to Andrew Zebrun III, and that was our show last night. And thank you to Michelle Gibson for sharing my videos, and thank you to all of you for hanging out with me and leaving great comments and liking and subscribing and buying me coffee and giving me suggestions and all that good stuff. So I'm going to say ciao here and finish research on the next story. So this is Joyce at MedusaWasFramed saying thank you and see you next time.